Laurence Vance holds degrees in history, theology, accounting, and economics. The author of many articles in both secular and religious publications, he has written and published 7 books, including Christianity and War and Other Essays. He is an adjunct instructor in accounting at Pensacola Junior College in Pensacola, Florida. Many of Laurence's articles, some of his articles are on our website. He's contributed to the Future Freedom Foundation, but most of his articles are on LouRockwell.com, and I really recommend them to you, especially if you're interested in the religious aspects of the war in Iraq and foreign policy in general. This man is just doing absolutely fantastic work in this area. I mean, he's challenging Christians with their own principles with respect to the Iraq War and foreign policy. And he's paid a personal price for that in his own church groups, among his own associates. It's very, very admirable how he has just stuck straight to his principles, especially as a devout Christian. The title of Laurence's talk is What the Church Should Be Saying About War and Foreign Policy. Laurence Vance.
It is fitting that today is a Sunday because I would like to speak this afternoon about what the church should be saying about war and foreign policy. This war, like all of the other foreign wars the United States has been involved in, is a consequence of our interventionist foreign policy. Although the foreign policy of the current administration has been referred to as the Bush Doctrine and this great mission, it is not much different from the foreign policy of most previous administrations. Gunboat diplomacy may have given way to cowboy diplomacy, but U.S. foreign policy is still aggressive, reckless, belligerent, and meddling. The history of U.S. foreign policy is the history of hegemony, nation-building, regime change, and jingoism. In a word, it is a history of interventionism, with its stepchildren, imperialism and empire. Although Donald Rumsfeld claims that we don't seek empires and we're not imperialistic, I don't hesitate to use the terms. Not only did the 9/11 Commission report conclude that the American homeland is the planet, it referred to the Department of Defense as the behemoth among federal agencies. With an annual budget larger than the gross domestic product of Russia, it is an empire. The extent of the U.S. global empire is almost incalculable. The Department of Defense's base structure report states that the department's physical assets consist of more than 600,000 individual buildings and structures at more than 6,000 locations on more than 30 million acres. There are over 700 U.S. military bases on foreign soil. There are U.S. troops stationed in 159 different regions of the world in every corner of the globe. There are 285,000 U.S. troops stationed in foreign countries, not counting the 200,000 troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. There are 100,000 U.S. soldiers in Europe to face a non-existent Soviet Union. The United States has commitments to provide security to over 35 countries. The United States still maintains 64,000 troops in Germany, 33,000 troops in Japan, and 10,000 troops in Italy, 60 years after World War II. We have, in fact, never stopped mobilizing for war since World War II, manufacturing enemies where we could find none. In addition to military personnel, the Department of Defense employs 675,000 people worldwide, including thousands of foreign nationals. But instead of all this being an example of imperialism and empire, we are told by neoconservative intellectuals that the United States is merely exercising benevolent hegemony. Because the United States seems to have none of the benefits of an empire, but all of its drawbacks, some imperialists, those who believe that it is in the national interest of the United States to intervene in conflicts around the globe, attempt to control foreign governments, and spread our political and economic systems to other countries by force, They argue that we are not an empire because we haven't annexed any country's soil in over 100 years. But America's unprecedented global empire of troops, bases, and ships clearly says otherwise. We may not be an empire in name, but we are an empire in denial. A noted British historian has remarked that the greatest empire of modern times has come into existence without the American people even noticing. Well, some of us have noticed, and we don't like what we see. Besides the obvious, an empire of troops, bases, and ships, we see an empire of influence, domination, and occupation. We see an empire maintained by bribes, threats, and coercion. We see an empire sustained by nationalism, militarism, and jingoism. America spends more on defense than the next 12 countries combined. This can't be because we have more people. China and India have a greater population. Or because we have a larger land area to protect. Russia and Canada have more territory. With an official budget for fiscal year 2008 that is over $538 billion, Pentagon spending accounts for about 40% of total world military spending. Yet, economist Robert Higgs has estimated that the true amount spent by the United States on defense will actually top $1 trillion for the first time in history. This means that defense-related spending will account for about 1/3 of the total federal budget. But some would say that is a small price to pay for our security. This is a dangerous world we live in. The United States faces a variety of threats from terrorists and rogue nations. There is no price too high to pay for our security. There is no disputing that there are a number of countries in the world that hate the United States. And that number would be even higher if we turned off the foreign aid. But instead of reserving to ourselves the right of preemptive strikes and saying of potential foreign aggressors, like President Bush did, bring them on, shouldn't we be asking some serious questions about our foreign policy? Why do they hate us? Why do they burn our flag? Why do they demonstrate against us? Why did they bomb our embassies? Why did they try to blow up one of our ships? Why did they take out the Twin Towers? I think we will find that in most cases the answer is because of our foreign policy. Many Americans have begun to wonder why, if the mission of the Department of Defense is to defend the country, that we need a Department of Homeland Security. The truth of the matter is that the Department of Defense, which couldn't defend its own headquarters, is misnamed. Rather than guarding our borders, patrolling our coasts, and protecting our citizens, the DoD is focused on invading the next country and fighting the next foreign war. Foreign military bases are for offensive military actions, not defensive ones, and likewise for the stationing abroad of thousands of military troops. There is no better example, of course, of the true mission of the Department of Defense than the current war in Iraq. An unconstitutional, unnecessary, immoral, senseless, and unjust war if there ever were one. It is unconstitutional because only Congress has the authority to declare war. It is unnecessary because Iraq was no threat to the United States. It is immoral because it was based on lies. It is unjust because it is not defensive. It is senseless because 3,400 U.S. soldiers have died in vain. The war in Iraq is also terribly expensive, costing the American taxpayers over $200 million a day. The final cost of the war is projected to be as high as $2 trillion. That is a far cry from the $50 billion that then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld said the war would cost. So rather than America's military heritage being one of how the military has defended the country from attack, it is instead one of invasion, destabilization, occupation, subjugation, oppression, death, and destruction. Instead of the U.S. military defending our freedoms, the military has been at once the world's policeman, fireman, social worker, bully, and busybody. Rather than the presence of the U.S. military guaranteeing peace and stability throughout the world, the presence of the U.S. military, more often than not, is the cause of war and instability around the globe.